Tonight, Suella Braverman says that uncontrolled and illegal migration is an existential challenge to the West, and multiculturalism has failed. In a speech in the United States, the Home Secretary is scathing about immigration levels across Europe and in the UK. Tonight, we'll have full reaction and debate on what's already been described as a landmark intervention. Also tonight, the head of London's Met Police says that armed officers are anxious, with many still refusing to work after one was charged with murder, with capacity significantly reduced. And as the Lib Dem autumn conference comes to a close, Sir Ed Davey focuses his attack on the Conservatives, telling members the British people are desperate for hope, change and a fair deal. All that and more with the former government advisor James Starkey and Sunder Katwala, the Director of British Future, who are here to give their take for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, today really felt like a moment. The British Home Secretary speaking to a global audience, saying that immigration is an existential challenge and nations which cannot control their borders will not long survive. I mean, I genuinely can't remember any UK government minister using stronger language on immigration in my lifetime. So what is Suella Braverman really up to? She says that international refugee laws need a major overhaul and fear of discrimination for being gay or being a woman shouldn't automatically be enough for an asylum claim. So what should the law be? And will whatever that is now become government policy? Plus, we're talking about the UN's 1951 Refugee Convention here. 150 countries are signed up to it. Is the UK's Home Secretary going to be able to lead the charge to get it changed? Wouldn't that be the job of the Prime Minister anyway? So to go back to the original question, what is Suella Braverman up to? Well, if you're as cynical as me, one word has probably popped into your mind already: leadership. Because if the polls stay as they are, and if the Conservatives lose the next election, where does the party go next? Well, today in Washington, Suella Braverman laid out one path. Well, that was the speech by the Home Secretary. It was 4,500 words long, and it has given us a lot to talk about this evening. So let's hear some of it first, shall we? This is Suella Braverman speaking in New York.
The nation-state has endured because it means something real to almost all of us, and that is true the world over. Given how much it matters, it must be protected. Saying so does not make one anti-immigrant, nor does it mean you're anti-immigration. I am the child of immigrants, and it's no betrayal of my parents' story to say that immigration must be controlled. Let me be clear, there are vast swathes of the world where it is extremely difficult to be gay or to be a woman. Where individuals are being persecuted, it is right that we offer sanctuary. But we will not be able to sustain an asylum system if, in effect, simply being gay or a woman or fearful of discrimination in your country of origin is sufficient to qualify for protection.
Well, our US correspondent Mark Stone was in the room when the Home Secretary made that speech and was able to ask her a couple of questions.
I just wanted to pick up on the anecdote you just gave, a very eloquent anecdote about your father, that he had no friends, no money, no passport, he wanted a better life. Do you accept that that is the story replicated throughout this migration journey? Every single one of those people has the same story that your father had. And I wonder how you could square that with your views that you have outlined this morning. And just to follow up, if I can, some have called your speech here grandstanding, and you can kind of see why. This is a very, very small room in America. You're speaking to a very small audience. And I wonder if this is perhaps more about your leadership ambitions of a party that's really quite struggling at the moment.
Well, addressing the first issue, I mean, what you're suggesting is because I'm the child of immigrants, I have to adopt a position which is pro-migration and pro the status quo. And I totally and fundamentally refute that. I think that is totally at odds with the challenge that we are facing today. Unprecedented levels of people coming to our country illegally with no right to be there, gaming our system, pretending to be refugee, pretending to be fleeing persecution, to come to the country illegitimately. And I mean, that cannot be how we conduct this conversation. We need to be honest with the British people, and we need to be honest about the challenges and the solutions. And just because I have an immigrant background does not exclude me from this conversation. And my job as Home Secretary is to be honest with the British people, to tell them that the system as it currently stands internationally is not working. We need to start working towards a solution that is sustainable and fair. Listen, I'm incredibly honoured to be here at the AEI. The AEI represents the forefront of thought leadership and policy making in the US and actually internationally. And to be hosted here to talk about migration in the international context, followed by meetings with my American counterparts, is really, again, part of my day job, part of my duty as Home Secretary. I want to lead this conversation globally, and I want to work with like-minded partners to find a solution.
Well, let's talk to Mark now, shall we? Mark, we saw you there questioning the Home Secretary. I guess my first question is, why was she in America?
Well, to be honest, we wondered that. It was a curious decision. I mean, if she was looking to find an immigration system, a migration system that works, well, she definitely won't find it here in the United States. So it is not a system which showcases migration. They have just the same problems that Europe is facing. The southern border is facing really, really serious challenges. If she was looking to criticise the Biden administration, well, then that's pretty diplomatically awkward. And indeed, some of the American media has already picked up on this awkward juxtaposition that a British Home Secretary is coming over here to talk to their closest ally and at the same time is pointing out that their immigration system is broken too. But look, I think that's the point of what she is doing. Yes, we could talk about it being for a domestic audience, for her, perhaps dog whistling to the right of her party because of ambitions that she may have. But what she is also trying to do is to provoke, yes, with very strong language, to provoke a conversation, to provoke an argument about the broader immigration, or should I say asylum system globally, designed after World War II that she thinks doesn't work now. I think, there is common ground on one thing. I think everyone agrees that the system globally is not working at the moment. The problem is they don't know how to fix it. Is it about big walls or is it about big gates? Is it maybe about both of those things? And at the moment, there is an asylum system that is neither fair for the Liberals or firm for the Conservatives. And at the heart of it, obviously, is hundreds and hundreds, millions of people.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it, Mark? And it does feel, like you say, that all countries are grappling with these big issues in the UK and in the US as well. Was there much in the ways of kind of answers, I guess, from Suella Braverman today?
No, I think this wasn't a policy announcement. No policy will come from this. This is, as I say, is about provoking a conversation. And what is striking is that it's easy to think that this is maybe just a Dover-Calais problem or a Lampedusa, Italy problem. It's not. It is a global problem. The question is how you address it. Do you address it, as I say, by somehow firming up or tightening up domestic asylum procedures, or does it involve some sort of a massive global overhaul, something that, as you said, she's never going to be able to instigate? She's being intentionally provocative for two reasons. One, to throw some red meat to the right on her party, and two, because she does firmly believe that immigration rules are too loose, that they need to change. But I was struck that she seemed to to wrap everyone together and say everyone seems to be faking it, everyone seems to be chancing it and choosing the country they want to go to. The reality on the ground, the reality that I found in Greece, in Italy, on the southern border here, in the Middle East, it is not that they are chancing it. They come to the UK not because they think it's the greatest place on earth, but because they speak English. They come to the UK because we don't have ID cards, so it's easier to get a job. These are the real reasons. But yeah, undoubtedly, it is a massive global challenge, and what she is doing is provoking a conversation, one that hasn't at the moment been had.
Certainly provoking a conversation we're going to be having on the programme tonight. Mark, thank you very much indeed. I just want to have a closer look now at some of the numbers the Home Secretary gave in her speech today, because she said that the current UN accord means that 780 million people could claim asylum right now. Now, that number is drawn from research that calculated who could technically be eligible along the world. Now, the number of people who actually claimed asylum, though, through the UNHCR's refugee programme last year is far lower than that. That's actually 29.4 million. Now, the number of asylum claims in the UK has been trending upwards. You can see here it hit a high last year of 99,939, and more than 18,000 applications received decisions. Just over 3/4 of those were granted refugee status or humanitarian protection. Now, today, Suella Braverman said that fearing discrimination for being gay or being a woman should not be a sole reason to claim asylum. Now, there isn't any data on how many claims are made on the basis of gender, but if you have a look at this, women actually only represent a quarter of asylum claims in the UK. And the number of applications being made on the basis of sexual orientation is also a small fraction of the total. You can see here, only around 1,300, that's less than 2%. And most, of course, being made from countries that are not in conflict zones as well. Right, let's talk to our first guest, the Conservative MP, Brendan Clark-Smith. Thank you very much for being on the programme tonight. What did you make of Suella Braverman's speech today?
I was quite impressed. I mean, really, this is speaking the same language as my constituents. It's what they wanted to hear. And again, she's emphasised the fact that she's a child of immigrants herself. She knows what a welcoming country the UK is. She wants that to continue, but she wants to see some fairness. And to get that fairness, really, we need to talk to our partners globally, because this is a global issue. It's not something confined to the UK. And she's looking at maybe getting a solution to that and working together to go forwards with it.
The language is pretty, I guess, apocalyptic is the word that I'm sort of searching for. You know, nations which cannot control their borders will not long survive, saying that uncontrolled migration is existential. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think you need law and order. I think you need to have a situation where you're not getting that chaos of completely uncontrolled borders. And of course, we want to keep people safe. We want to make sure the people who are coming into the country are ones who want to contribute, who want to play fair, who want to live by our laws, who want to respect the values that we actually have there. And of course, there are a number of people who have very genuine claims for asylum, and we want to make sure that we welcome those and they're not being pushed out really by people who are effectively economic migrants who are asylum shopping.
I guess as my other thought on this as well is that Suella Braverman is using very evocative language. There's a lot of rhetoric coming out of the government as a whole when it comes to asylum seeking, when it comes to illegal immigration as well. But just looking at the record, I mean, we've spent so much time talking about the Rwanda policy, and so far 0 people have actually gone to Rwanda under the scheme. The Prime Minister and the Home Secretary standing in front of those, big lecterns promising to stop the boats, and the boats have not been stopped. Is the problem your delivery?
Well, I think there's no magic bullet or one particular policy that's going to solve it all. And Rwanda is one of those policies that we've got, and it's in the Supreme Court at the moment. I think if we do get the go-ahead with that, it will make a big difference. But then we've been looking at returns agreements. We've got a very successful agreement with Albania now. That's one of the countries where we're getting large groups of young men really coming over. We're looking at cutting the backlog for it, and of course talking with other countries as well. We look at what's happened in Lampedusa. If you're looking at the United States as an example, you can see what the Mayor of New York, Eric Adams, has been saying there. They've been having problems too. So it's about taking a pragmatic approach, really, recognizing that this is an international problem, but that we've got to look at practical reasons how we can solve it. Some of those are legal reasons, some of these are maybe international agreements, and that's why she's mentioned the Geneva Convention. Now, this is nothing new. You can go back to look at people like, say, Jack Straw or Phil Willis, and even as back as 2009, Labour were actually mentioning themselves about people being free from persecution, but really a lot of this problem coming from people who are actually economic migrants. So I think this discussion has been going along for quite a while, and Suella Braverman really wants to raise it again and say that actually she's the person who wants to kind of lead a bit of a charge with this.
You see, that's the point, isn't it? She is positioning herself as a person to lead the charge on this. I did watch that speak and think, what's going on here? You'd think it would be the Prime Minister leading the charge to change international law, to get your partners on side around the world to come together on this. Do you think she'd make a good future leader?
Well, I think certainly she's a good Home Secretary. As mentioned, Jack Straw's another example.
That's not what I asked. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to come in. It was a nice attempt at a dodge. But what about, would she make a good Prime Minister?
Well, I've got a lot of time for the Home Secretary and a Red Wall MP, and as somebody who wants to be tough on immigration. But this is, of course, part of the Prime Minister's plan. One of his top 5 priorities was to stop the boats. So he's very much there with his blessing there, very much trying to push forward the government's policy on it. And I'm a lot more positive than other people, I think, Sophie. I genuinely think that we can win this next general election, and Rishi Sunak is the person who's going to do that for us. So I think too many are looking at it as a potential election defeat there and what's going to happen afterwards. But you see how the polls have been shifting. You saw the mess Labour got into last week with their immigration policy, how they're trying to look both ways on net zero. And this is the latest thing now. And when it comes to it, their policies, when they're scrutinised, they really, really struggle. So I think we can win that next general election with Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. And of course, you need a strong Home Secretary, I think, to tackle the small boats issue. And I think Suella Braverman is that strong Home Secretary.
OK. Thank you very much for being on the programme. Let's put some of that to Labour's Peter Carr, shall we? The Shadow Science, Innovation and Technology Secretary. What we heard there, you're going to lose the next election.
I don't think that's unlikely. I don't think that's likely at all, because if you looked at Suella Braverman's speech today, I didn't see all of it, but I saw the clips you just played. You give the impression that you're looking at somebody who is a shock jock, a commentator, not somebody who is actually the Home Secretary. This is somebody who has blamed UK courts, who has blamed European judges, and now she's gone global with her blame. But just look at the facts. Since 2010, the number of people who have been returned after failing to get an asylum application granted has fallen by 70%. This happened on her watch. When Rishi Sunak said earlier this year that he was going to stop the small boats and that he was going to end the use of hotels for asylum seekers, it was costing us, as a country, £6 million a day. It's now costing £8 million a day. So this is all Suella Braverman's fault. It is her department that's responsible for all of this, and all of the statistics are going in the wrong direction. For asylum seekers who are coming here, they're waiting 2 years, often more, just to have their claim processed. And now she's going abroad and blaming some kind of international treaty for what is her failure to run her government department properly.
Some people will listen to what Suella Braverman says and think, you know what, she's got a point. You know, we can't take in every person who fears discrimination, because sadly there are a lot of countries in the world that do discriminate. I mean, do you agree with her there?
Of course, we agree that people who come here who claim asylum, they need to have their application processed. If they fail, they need to be returned. But that's what's not happening.
But what she's saying is that the system itself, the merits on which the asylum claims are being processed is wrong. It needs updating.
No, what needs to happen is that we need to have a process that is well run, so that people who do claim... Look, the whole system has been mismanaged. If you look at the small boats, 5 years ago there were 400 people coming across the channel on small boats. Now we're looking at almost 50,000, maybe touching even 60,000. That's because the government failed to see it happening. They broke the system for which the applications happen. So, now, look, to fix the system, we need to stop sending more Home Secretaries to Rwanda than asylum seekers, use that money to set up a criminal task force within the National Crime Agency so that we can work with Interpol and our European neighbours. We can start cracking down on those criminal gangs who are trafficking the people. We need to have...
It's hard, though, you know, like we've heard an awful lot about
busting the gangs. It would be nice to try, wouldn't it? It would be nice to have a government that tried.
I think the Home Secretary would say that they are trying to bust the gangs. And Interpol themselves said that it's actually, this is such a difficult thing to crack because it's transient, the relationships people have with people.
Difficult to crack,
If anyone waved a magic wand, then do it, then they do it, wouldn't they?
Of course it's difficult to crack, but it would be nice to have a government that actually tried rather than flew around the world just posturing. I mean, you can't... To have...
Is it a leader pitch, you think?
Oh, there's no question. She does very little else. But look, these are all policies that don't work, costing taxpayers an exorbitant amount of money, £8 million a day to house the failure of Suella Braverman to get a grip on the asylum programme in this country. The number of individual cases processed by one individual caseworker in the Home Office has fallen 50% in the last 5 years. Suella Braverman is up to her neck in the failure, and now she's blaming others.
A few other questions for you, if I may. I've just come back down from Lib Dem conference in Bournemouth, and Lib Dem MPs couldn't walk 3 metres without a journalist saying, are you going to go into a coalition with Labour? So they wouldn't give a straight answer, so I'm wondering if you'd give a straight answer to that question. Would Labour go into coalition with the Lib Dems? No,
because we don't need to. We are ahead in the polls. We have the programme for government. It is working. No, it's not.
If there was a hung parliament, which the polls suggest is a likely possibility, would you go into coalition with the Lib Dems?
No, because the polls are not suggesting a hung parliament. The polls are suggesting...
I said that it's suggesting that it is likely.
No.
That is...
The polls are not suggesting a hung parliament. What the polls are suggesting is they want a clear, credible alternative, a programme for government based on a mission-led government, led by Keir Starmer. That's why we are consistently 20 points ahead.
Not going to get a straight answer on this from Labour as well.
Let me just tell you this, Sophie. The Lib Dems are a party that is looking for some coattails to ride into government. It will not be the Labour Party that provides them with that journey. The Labour Party is seeking to govern in its own right, and that is why we're doing so well with voters at the moment, because people are responding to Keir Starmer's mission-led government in waiting so that we can start tackling the big challenges the country faces, but not just to mitigate the challenges that's left behind, like 7.7 million people waiting for treatment on the NHS, creating new opportunities, harnessing the technologies of the future, create new jobs, seeing that the green challenge we face is not just an existential challenge of climate change, it is an opportunity to create the jobs of the future and the wealth creation of the future.
You've got some research about employment figures out today, haven't you, as well? What's that showing?
Well, it's showing out of the 38 countries in the OECD, which is 38 countries which are like-minded with us as a country, we are the only one that is going backwards when it comes to unemployment, employment and people who are economically inactive. The only one. We need to make sure that we retool our Job Centre Pluses, get them facing the future, because there's been no work on reforming the way we work with individuals since the COVID pandemic. So we have a whole class of people, a whole group of people who are economically inactive. We're not looking at the specific reasons for it. We're not actually putting the effort in to try and give them the tailored support they need to get back into the workplace.
There's one other thing that I do want to squeeze in before we come to the end of the interview, because I am totally confused about HS2. What is Labour's position, right? What is it?
Well, you've got to tell us what the government position is so that we can respond to it. What is
why do I need to tell you what the government position is? What's Labour's position?
I'll tell you why, Sophie, because when we left office...
Why does it make any difference what the government's position is?
Let me explain to you why.
I'm very confused still. I think it's going to be cleared up.
Let me explain to you why, Sophie. When we left office and we commissioned HS2, then the government did the implementation plan. It cost the plan they put forward cost £32 billion. Since then, because they have extended it, they've contracted it, they've cancelled contracts, put bits on hold, they've then recommissioned bits of it that they'd already previously commissioned, and we've had inflation caused by the mini-budget of the government last year. So costs have gone up by £60 billion.
OK, so what would Labour do?
They're now talking about cancelling again. What Labour will do is see what the state of this programme is when we get towards the point of a general election, and we will make sure that we deliver the high-speed infrastructure and the rail infrastructure that the country needs at that point. We cannot commit until we see how much more damage this government are going to do to our economy, to jobs, to growth,
to the second
and
leg
to...
of HS2.
We don't know what we're going to inherit. How can I say it until you can tell me in specific terms what we're going to leave for us to inherit should we take office next year? I can't tell you what we're going to have to do in response. So when you get an answer out of the government, I'll come back and give you an answer about what the Labour Party will do, because we need to see how much more damage they're going to do to our rail infrastructure,
well, hopefully we'll get an
to our
answer
economy,
out of one of you, either you or the government.
And our asylum system.
Thank you very much for being on the programme,
Thank
Peter
you.
Carr there. Coming up next on the Politics Hub, I'm going to be getting reaction to that from tonight's panel, the former Home Office Special Advisor James Starkey and Sunder Katwala, the Director of British Future.
Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Well,
Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
and everything, his memories is all gone.
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
We have to get Trump out of the White House.
I'm playing devil's advocate.
You got your political agenda.
No, it's honestly...
God love you.
And beyond the United States, I report from around the world.
This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet.
Yeah, I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem.
What do you think of ISIS?
Everybody here, they know the truth of ISIS.
Hello, welcome back. Now, the big story we're covering tonight is Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary's speech on immigration, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the thoughts of these two, former Home Office Special Advisor James Starkey and Sunda Katwala, who is the Director of British Future. Thanks both for being on the programme. Sunda, to you first. What's your kind of big takeaway from the Home Secretary's speech?
Well, I think the asylum system, the boats, is a massive headache for the government. So it's quite surprising, I think, to travel the world and say maybe we've solved it. Does everyone want to look at our solution, because you're still stuck in the courts with Rwanda and so on. I think by telling this big global story, the sheer scale of the problem that might overwhelm everybody and everything, maybe you put in context the challenges and the struggles you're having. But I think there's double edges about that existential language, the threat to our nation, the threat to our democracy, the threat
It's
to our
quite striking,
multicultural society.
that language. I remember you were saying that you can't remember, I think you tweeted to say you can't remember another UK government minister in the post-war period using that strength of language.
Yeah, governments are struggling with asylum and people want to see that controlled, but the idea our very society might collapse. I think, Britain is a really successful multi-ethnic society, multi-ethnic democracy, and is testament to that we've got so much diversity in our public life and so on. So having confidence in an asylum system isn't really putting at risk the whole basis of our democracy and our multi-ethnic society.
And James, it feels to me like there's no one better perhaps to sort of talk about the kind of the inner workings of the Home Office. I mean, you've sort of spent time there advising, Priti Patel among others. How difficult an issue is this to solve?
I think on the one hand, it's a very difficult. It's a very, very difficult issue, and as I think Brendan touched upon, this is overall it's been an issue for over 2 decades. Labour Home Secretaries wrestled with this, as Brendan mentioned. Jack Straw and Phil Willis kind of talked about the Geneva Convention. I think as an issue, though, what was interesting with the Peter Kyle interview is I think the Conservatives will feel that in constituencies, especially like Brendan's and that red wall, this is a topic that Labour still aren't comfortable with. So when you pressed him about whether he agreed that maybe some of those asylum claims are more economic than they are, than they should be, he didn't really want to answer that question. So it's kind of both ways. On a competency issue, I think it's not overstating it to say it's a tough one for the Tories, given what's happened over the last couple of years with the amount of people that have come in. But on a kind of, in talking to the electorate, they feel much more comfortable than Labour doing. And I think you can see that in the interviews with the Labour Party.
Is that your sort of sense as well, that actually there are a big proportion of voters, particularly in some of those swing seats, that actually agree with Suella Braverman?
This issue really polarises by party now, because there's control and deter and refuse, and there's be more compassionate and let people in, and there's all right and the left have those instincts. Labour's much more comfortable saying you're wasting a lot of money and it isn't working, because that appeals to people who think it's wrong in principle and it's failed in practice. I think the big challenge for the government is if you are refusing everybody, including people with valid claims, actually it's not working. You don't have a way to do that. Even if the Supreme Court lets you send 300 people to Rwanda, 30,000 people have come. You've said you can refuse them all and return them. Well, you can't return people to Afghanistan. You haven't got a deal with France. So you've got a choice, I think, between international cooperation, Home Secretary is talking about today, and Keir Starmer is talking about, or pulling out of things and retreating and not being part of treaties and so on. But pulling out of things doesn't give you a solution to the real-world problem.
Talking about the competency thing, would you have advised Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman to be, having pictures in front of those big stop the boat lecterns? I mean, you're not going to be able to stop the boats, are you? Whatever happens.
I don't think you had a choice. I think if you look at the issues that concern the people they're targeting for the next election, so to zoom out very slightly, the Conservatives are not going to win new votes, right? They're not going to put on votes. So they've only got the pool that they had last time.
So they're trying to re-energise their base, basically.
We know what the issues they care about. Top issue is the economy. So he's focused on inflation. But boats is a big issue for that group of people. So I think it's betting big, and we won't see if it works until the next 6 months. They'll be hoping that Rwanda works. But I think certainly if you speak to people in kind of Tory high command in CCHQ and Number 10, they really feel they didn't have a choice, and that it's go there or go bust.
That's really interesting. What about the big issues that she's touching on? I mean, is the refugee charter working? Is that still working?
The reason we've got the convention, it's Hitler's Holocaust, it's the genocide, it's needing international agreements. That's been contentious in every issue. It was massively contentious when Ted Heath let, Ugandan Asians in. But that principle, you need to maintain it, but you need to show that it's manageable. So in 2015, the big question is, can you manage? So I think while you have this political debate that is control and deter versus compassion and be nice, you've got to show that you can manage an asylum system that's orderly, that's workable, and that's humane. And you can only do that across 20 miles of water by an agreement between governments.
And the other thing I want to ask you about, James, as well, is maybe I'm wrong, but it just looks a bit strange to me that this is the Home Secretary in the US making this hugely interventionist speech. Is that a bit weird?
Well, I don't think you'd be the only person to look at lots of things that are going on around the Conservative Party and think that a few of them might have an eye on what happens after the next election.
Yeah.
And we're going to have Conservative Party conference next week, and I'll be quite surprised if we didn't see a few other people kind of brandish their views to the members, to the other MPs. So I think there'll be a lot of people that might look at that speech and think the same thing.
Do you think it was sanctioned?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't think there was anything in there that was... I read the speech earlier. I don't think there was anything in there that anyone in government would feel they can't back. I think she genuinely tried to open up a conversation exactly as Sunder said, which is in the same way they want to do with the economy. The frustration on the economy is because of the trust budget, people the public blame that on the Conservative Party. I think on both issues they want to say this is a global issue that we're wrestling with, etc. So I think it's defendable. Whether or not it was fully cleared, who knows? We may never know.
There's cleared and cleared, right? There's OK, you can do it. Or there's we want you to go and do this speech. It's
exactly.
Really interesting to talk. We'll have more from James and Sunder on the programme later. OK, right, we're going to have more on that speech, as I said, a bit later in the programme. But time now to take a look at our Digital Politics Hub, which I'm in front of right now. And our team have been updating it throughout the day, as you can see. Right, let's have a look at some of the stories, shall we? This is the first one that I want to bring you tonight, because Rishi Sunak's move away from some of those net zero commitments continues to cause ripples. Conservative peer Zach Goldsmith, there he is. He's warned that politicians will, in his words, look ridiculous in the years to come if they don't get on board with the transition to clean energy. Plus, we've got a little bit more of a clear idea from Labour today about their plans to bring in VAT for private school fees. Now, it had been thought they might phase it in over a longer period, but instead, we understand it's going to be brought in almost immediately if they do enter government after the next election. And I have to say, this is pretty grim news. Here we go. Grim warning from the music industry today, with the UK's small music venues saying that they are experiencing a full-blown crisis, with many forced to close over the last year. And they've written to the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, to ask for an extension to business rate relief to try and help with that. Now, if you scan the QR code, you can catch up with all of the latest on the Hub throughout the day. Just want to bring you a little bit of breaking political news just in the last few moments now. Sir Alok Sharma, former cabinet minister, if you remember, he was in charge of that COP26 conference in Glasgow. He has written to his constituency association tonight to say he's standing down at the next election. He says it wasn't an easy decision, but he will continue to support his Conservative colleagues. He was one of those ones not very happy with Rishi Sunak rowing back on some of those net zero commitments. Coming up next on the Politics Hub, the Met Commissioner's warning about a reduction in the numbers of armed police available. What's next for the troubled force? Hello and welcome back to the Politics Hub, where each night we give you a front row seat on all of the day's political drama. Now, I want to return to a story that we brought you last night, and this is the concerns about armed police in the Met. Because today, the Commissioner, the head of the Met, has warned that the number of armed police in London is significantly down, and the reason for that is some firearms officers deciding to hand in their weapons and step back from their duties after one of their number was charged with the murder of Chris Capper, who was an unarmed black man shot dead last year. Sky's Rachel Venables has more.
We can provide credible firearms cover for London, but I must be honest, it's still significantly less than normal.
The Commissioner of the Met Police having to explain why there are fewer armed officers available on the streets of London after some refused to carry firearms when a fellow officer was charged with murder.
Officers are extremely anxious, and I think it's important to put this in context. A lot of this is driven by families. Many of them are under pressure from their partners, sort of wives, husbands, parents, children, who actually are saying, I'm worried about what you might go through based on your job. I'm not sure we're up for this as a family, given the severity of it and the longevity that it might go.
Yesterday, the Met Police said they no longer needed the army to be on standby as enough officers had returned to armed duty. But now Sky News has heard from more firearms officers who say they may be prepared for the first time to hand in their weapons if the officer charged with killing Chris Cabba loses his anonymity at a hearing next week. One officer told us the anonymity hearing will determine what happens. If he loses his anonymity, then serious questions will be asked. I haven't handed my firearm in yet, but I would if that happens. And there are many others that would do the same. Defendants don't normally get anonymity, but judges can grant it in exceptional circumstances.
Certain orders in place for people like this officer, you know, a counter-terrorism specialist firearms officer whose daily work involves being covert. You know, he may be involved in all sorts of terrorist operations. You know, to identify him in the public realm is not just dangerous to him, potentially his family and other people, but it also, you know, it gives the impression that to other officers that this sort of thing will happen.
Meanwhile, there's growing discontent from some people about the Commissioner's calls for greater legal protections for armed officers.
There is no trust and faith in the community in places like this. There is no faith, there is no confidence, and it's clear. Everybody can see they do not wish to be held to account, especially by the black community.
If the Commissioner wanted to reassure Londoners that things were getting back to normal, it's clear that many armed officers are in fact still deeply unhappy, with the threat of further protests looming large. Rachel Venables, Sky News, New Scotland Yard.
Let's speak to James and Sunder a bit more about this, shall we? James, in your sort of time at the Home Office, you must have dealt with the police all the time. How bad is the crisis on the Met?
I think more broadly, outside of this particular issue, with the things we've had over the past few years, obviously very prominent cases, I think the Met is in a difficult place now reputationally. Obviously, you know, it operates really with the confidence of the public, and it needs to retain that. I think that confidence has been damaged, particularly under Cressida Dick's time, quite significantly.
Do you think Mark Rowley is the man to clear it up?
I don't know, Mike, but I do think my impression is he seems to understand that trust needs to be rebuilt. So I think we've seen some comments from him since he's been in that he's aware that there's an issue there. And the Met is a lightning rod for the police. You know, most people, when they think of a police force, they think of the Met. And it is huge compared to any other police force. I think maybe West Midlands is second. And so they have an important role actually across the country in terms of public confidence in policing.
And it's important to remember this is a force that was found to be institutionally racist, sexist by the Casey Review as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a quarter of a century next year from the Macpherson Review into Stephen Lawrence, and I think what was gobsmacking really about the Casey Review was the culture experienced actually by women, by black and Asian people, not suspects or offenders, but who joined the police, and on the inside, the culture they're experiencing. So there's a real balance here, apart from any particular case. Good police officers want to be able to do the job, and it's very difficult. There's terrorism out there. But the Commissioner has also said that he hasn't been able to remove officers who shouldn't be in the police, and that some of the worst culture in the Casey Review is in the specialist firearms unit. So there's obviously a balance there. We're in a totally different world from America. 1,000 people a year are shot by the police in America. The NGO inquest, they say it's 80 and 30 years in Britain, and that, you know, that might be a tragedy in every case. But actually, we've had 4 criminal prosecutions, attempted prosecutions, and no convictions. And so whether or not you're too on edge, too in the dock, or whether we've got the balance right, it's not obvious to me. There's a case for greater protection. There's a case if someone is shot who is unarmed, you obviously need to have an inquiry into it. And there are people whose job it is to work out are there charges, and there are people whose job it is to work out whether or not you convict or you acquit.
It's important, like you say, to put it into context if you look at America as well. And I guess, you know, we all have sympathy with the guys who are out there. They have a heavy responsibility. They've got to make split-second decisions on whether or not to fire, and they're in a really dangerous job.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to spend some time with firearms officers whilst I was at the Home Office, and I think exactly that. Look, they do it. Their job is to be right at the front of danger. And wherever they are, they're protecting sites, they're protecting people, and then when something happens, they are first at the scene. And there's a lot of strict protocol. You know, if they draw their weapon, there's an immediate investigation, whether or not it's even fired. And so they are under, you know, it's a strict code they operate under. And it's a tough force. And I think, as Sunder said, whether the balance is right, I don't know. I don't know enough about this case. But I think it's what you do need to strike, for sure, is you need to protect those officers that are doing a difficult job, but you absolutely also need to retain public confidence of different communities, because that is how policing... And, you know, I think the police, I don't know if you agree, Sunder, the police did really spend a lot of time and effort and did rebuild trust after the Macpherson report over the past kind of 10, 20 years. And I think they got a lot of that back, and I think it would be terrible to see them to lose that again.
I'm really interested to talk to both of you on this issue. I just want to take you to another story, because last night we were at Lib Dem conference, witnessing a party in an upbeat mood. They're confident about making enough gains at the next election to be a power broker in who would become the next Prime Minister. And today was their leader, Ed Davey's big speech.
For the British people, the next general election can't come quickly enough. People are desperate for change. And while Rishi Sunak clings on, out of touch and out of ideas, our job, our responsibility, is to show the British people that positive change is possible and that we are ready to fight for it whenever the election comes. And this week, we've done just that.
Well, before I hopped on the train back to Westminster, as everyone decamped out of Bournemouth, I spoke to the Lib Dem Deputy Leader, Daisy Cooper. I first did ask her about the Suella Braverman speech about migration that we were discussing.
Suella Braverman and the Home Office have completely lost control of our borders. They have completely lost control of the entire immigration and asylum system. The Liberal Democrats want there to be a firm but fair system in this country, and under the Conservatives we don't have either. I think people are sick to the back teeth of the Home Secretary just grandstanding and talking again about tinkering with international law and potentially, you know, trying to threaten the international system. What we really need is a Home Secretary who can get to grips with the problems on the ground. What Liberal Democrats would like to see is for the Rwanda scheme, which is incredibly expensive already, where taxpayers are paying millions of pounds, it's not even off the ground. We would like to scrap that Rwanda scheme and spend that money on getting through the backlog here in the UK, so that those who have a fair claim can start their lives, start working and pay taxes, and those who don't have a fair claim can be returned to their home countries.
I don't think anyone would disagree that the system needs speeding up and the processing needs to be faster, but on what she's saying, do you agree that being gay or being a woman shouldn't be enough to claim asylum?
Well, under the current asylum system, those characteristics do come into play if you are at threat because of those characteristics.
And that's correct, you think, and you think that's right?
If somebody has a claim to asylum because they are vulnerable and they're going to be at threat, maybe their life is under threat because of those characteristics, then yes, of course. I think it's perhaps been mischaracterised as if simply being a woman or gay is a ticket to come into the UK. That is not how the asylum system works. If you are under threat because you are a woman or you're at threat because you are gay, then those are legitimate reasons to use in your claim for asylum in the UK.
Right, let's talk about Bournemouth. Ed Davey's speech, what's the key message?
Well, Ed has set out the Liberal Democrat plan to tear down the blue wall at the next general election. These are the areas where the Liberal Democrats are in second place to Conservative MPs and seats where we want to win. But at the same time, Ed has reinforced the fact that the NHS and tackling the crisis in the NHS is the #1 issue on which the Liberal Democrats will be campaigning between now and the general election. And he's spoken this afternoon about introducing a new pledge from the Liberal Democrats to give everybody in the country a 2-month cancer guarantee so that people can get their diagnosis and their treatment within 62 days.
Just want to looking at some of these commitments, right? Cancer guarantee, right to see a GP in 7 days, we want to spend billions more on social care. You say you're committed to the pensions triple lock, and at the same time, you've ditched your long-standing commitment to pay on income tax. I mean, this just doesn't add up. You're not a serious party.
every single general election, the Liberal Democrats have a fully costed manifesto.
So this is going to be fully costed? Who's going to be doing the sums?
This will be fully costed, and at the last general election, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which is very respected, said that our funding...
I'm not talking about the last general election, I'm talking about the current... I mean, look, I'm not an economist, but I just cannot see how that could possibly add up.
Well, what we've said is that we ruled out the 1 penny pledge because during a cost of living crisis, it is not the right thing to do to tax struggling families like the Conservatives have done. Over the last few months, we have indicated that there are places where the government could be looking to raise funding. So we've called for a windfall tax on the big oil and gas companies. We were the first party to call for that. There is already a windfall tax, but it's not as big as the windfall tax that we had asked for, and there are loopholes in it, which means that if they were closed, we could be raising billions more.
Loopholes. I've heard this before. I mean, come on, is this like kind of centrist populism? It doesn't feel serious to me.
I think this is incredibly serious. There is a crisis in our NHS, there is a crisis in social care, and people around the country feel it in their lives on a daily basis. The Liberal Democrats are setting out the bold, radical ideas to fix our NHS and to fix social care, and we will provide a fully costed manifesto to show precisely how we're going to pay for it.
My interview there with Data Keeper from a very windy Bournemouth. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. A speech in Washington today on migration has been seen as a leadership pitch to the Conservative Party. But is she really that popular with members? We'll discuss next.
I mean, this is one of the rare occasions we've brought back samples from the solar system to study. We've got moon rocks, we've got samples of the wind from the sun, other samples from asteroids we've got, but this is a particularly large sample from a very important type of asteroid, which will tell us something about the origin of the solar system, and also, should we ever need to deflect an asteroid that's threatening us, it'll tell us something about the structure of the asteroid too.
So they have to make sure that they're kept pristine. You don't want to have any Earth particles, disrupting this... Contaminating that sample. So they've moved it now to a special laboratory curation place in Johnson Space Centre. They'll be very, very carefully taking away the layers from the spacecraft, and we're hoping within about 10 days they'll actually open the capsule, which has got the sample inside.
It belongs to the United States. Oh. It's their mission. It landed on their territory. So although they will store 3/4 of it for future reference, because in the future we'll have better techniques to analyse it, and it's a limited resource, they will only analyse a fraction of it, and they will give it to scientists. The good thing about this science is that any scientist anywhere in the world, if they come up with a good idea to analyse it, they will get a piece of this asteroid.
It's like a time capsule for the solar system. Like, it's come from very early on when planets were forming, but it gives us it will give us a view into what things were happening then, and hopefully it will give us some idea of how the solar system formed, and also potentially what were the elements that caused the origins of life on this planet if they came to Earth from similar asteroids. Well, they were actually going to do a special manoeuvre that would have allowed them to measure exactly what the weight of the sample was, but when they sort of went down and scooped up, you say, rather more than they expected, they actually had a bit of an issue with closing the capsule properly, and they started losing little bits of it. So they didn't perform that manoeuvre and rather just concentrated on sealing the capsule and bringing as much of it as they could back down to Earth. So that's why we think it's 250 grams. That's from some, very smart maths and, orbital mechanics that they've sort of hoped that. But until they get it out and actually weigh it, we're not 100% sure.
Hello and welcome back to the Politics Hub, with your source for all of the day's political news and analysis. Now, Suella Braverman's speech in Washington has been seen by some, including me, as a pitch to be leader after the next election. But she's not actually as much as a crowd pleaser to the Conservative membership as she once was. Now, Conservative Home do a regular survey of members of the Cabinet. Now, this is the one from August 2022. Firstly, look at these guys. Ben Wallace, Liz Truss, it's like Back to the Future, isn't it? Around a year ago. But Suella Braverman, as you can see, really, really high, 51.9 approval rating, second only to Ben Wallace. Look at the latest survey. Watch this. Toppling down the leadership board there, all the way to there. 30 points to just over 20%. Let's bring in our panellists at this time, shall we? I mean, Kemi Badenoch's the top there, isn't she? Does the Suella Braverman tumble from popularity surprise you guys, or?
I think, I mean, we touched on it earlier, Home Office is a tough department. So it's the kind of, when I went there first, someone who'd been there before said, don't open any cupboards because a bad news story will definitely fall out of it if you open it. So it's always going to be a tough department. I think she is still, I mean, obviously the poll, I think she would be popular with members in a leadership contest.
Yeah, interesting.
Whether or not she would win. I mean, historically, what you've seen is, broadly speaking, the person on the right who goes into the final two. So the big question for me would be who's in the final two.
She does a lot worse than that if you looked at the public ratings, Conservative voters and others. And I think both the party and the public, actually, even if people like the sound of what you're saying you can do, you're not the shadow Home Secretary, you're the Home Secretary. So if this time next summer, this time next autumn, you didn't stop the boats, it's fine saying I blame Keir Starmer, I blame the European judges, or I blame Joe Biden, but people will expect you to deliver. So I think that is one of the difficulties, really, of having such a, a job where prisoners can break out and boats can cross, and, there's all bad news in the Home Office and not much good news.
If I'm going to put you both on the spot, I haven't got very long left. Name someone to watch for the future leader of the Conservative Party?
That is very difficult.
Sunder?
You go.
There might be an outsider, but I think James Cleverly might be in it with Penny Mordaunt and Kemi.
I
can't put it.
Too difficult.
Go on, say Priti Patel.
Priti Patel.
That is all for tonight. Thank you both very much for a very lively panel. Remember, if you scan the QR code, you can catch up with all the latest on the Hub, including lots about the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Good night and see you tomorrow. We'll be back 7 p.m. for more on the Politics Hub.